Welcome to Politics 06. I'm Catalina Byrd, and I am joined by the infamous Billy Murphy. We're here this evening at Eden's Lounge, and we are discussing today's primary race. It's September the 12th, and I'm honored. How about yourself?
I'm thrilled.
We're here, BMORENEWS.com, and we're here to talk about today's race. Today, who did you vote for? Let's start there.
Well, I rarely discuss who I voted for, but I'll tell you who I like.
We can tweak it. We can let who you like.
And there's certain races I'm going to avoid for reasons I don't want to discuss. But
that's fine. I
voted for Kwesi Mfume. Love Kwesi. Been a fan of his since before he started in politics. Think he's the best man for the job. I like Ben Cardin, but I feel about Kwesi the way the Jews feel about Ben.
Right.
He's our guy.
He's our guy.
And he understands us, and I can depend on him not to have to learn about what our problems are. And he can teach others how to approach our community. Ben has to learn what our problems are. And we have to teach Ben what is in the best interest of our community. Now, I like and respect Ben, always have, but in this race I chose Kwesi Mfume.
Yeah, I went and supported Kwesi in the polls today. As an independent, I couldn't vote today, so I get to sit back and watch everybody else scramble. But
now, why would you give up your right to make decisions in the most important election in Maryland, and that's the Democratic primary? Now, put aside that it doesn't matter whether you're Democrat or Republican or an independent. It gives you the ability to decide who is going to govern. And it gives you much more of an ability if you're a registered Democrat than it does if you're an independent, because you can't vote in any primary.
This is true, but that law could be changed, and I don't have to change who I am. I have a problem with associating myself with any particular party when neither one holds true to the values that 100% that I feel.
But we're not talking about associating with a particular party. We're talking about having more power as a voter and having more choices, and the choice and the power to shape who your likely representatives are going to be, because just because you're an independent doesn't mean you don't like Democrats. Just because you're an independent doesn't mean you don't like Republicans.
Right.
As a matter of fact, it would be better to vote in the Republican primary than no primary at all, because at least there you will have some ability to shape and influence who those candidates will be. But as an independent...
I do that through prayer. I do that through prayer and wait for November and for the opportunity to support who it is that I pray for.
But that's what they told the slaves. They said, you don't need the right to vote, you got the right to pray.
Not the same. I still have the right to vote, just not twice in the same year.
But you're choosing to pray instead of voting, and I find that interesting.
I work for them too. I work for the polls for Kwesi today, and I would have no problem working and getting in the trenches and doing the job. It's just my vote today couldn't be counted. But in November it can be, and hopefully Brother Mfume will be on the ticket. That's what I choose to do.
Okay.
Now, it's my understanding that you live in PG County. Am I correct?
No, I live in Baltimore City. I've lived in Baltimore City.
Your practice
except
was in PG
when
County?
I went away to college and for the first 3 years of my life. And so I've been in Baltimore City 56 years.
You don't even look that old.
That's because I'm older.
When you can you give your forecast? What kind of races you wanted to see come out today?
Well, when I looked at the ballot, I got discouraged because I think that Ben Cardin will get the ignorant vote. And the ignorant vote is the vote that votes for the person who is the most prominently listed on the ticket. And in a statewide election, that's worth about, unfortunately, between 50,000 and 100,000 votes. And Kwesi's name is buried down in the bottom, and you have to be a committed Kwesi Mfume voter, or at least willing to look through all of a long list of candidates to pick him out. And unfortunately, there are a lot of voters who are uninformed, and they won't do that. So the ignorant vote goes to Ben. Ben also had more TV money. But I would be pleasantly surprised if my brother Kwesi Mfume won. I think that'd be best for the state of Maryland. Now, when you get into the Attorney General's race, I like Doug Gansler, but I voted for Stu Sims. Same principle. all things being equal, Stu understands the problems of the black community and doesn't have to be taught what they are. He's going to have to learn.
Do you think that we're still in a place now where we are electing black people in the hopes that they can translate our problems effectively? Are we not one community still?
Well, we've never been one community. We've always been a community artificially divided by the fictitious notion of race. Race was invented to classify us separately from people who chose to call themselves white. And it was an inferior classification by design. And intelligent people just don't play into it. The worst thing you can do as a human being is to adopt a lower category of yourself. The highest category of yourself is human being.
That's right.
A lower category is to adopt this arbitrary race classification thing. Now, that being said, it does not mean that you walk away from being black, because being black is a reality.
That's right.
Being black is a social condition. It's a political condition. It's a historical condition. And we've suffered because we've been classified as black because that classification was meant to be inferior and we were treated as inferior. And so as people classified as black, we have an obligation to other people classified as black, as a matter of fact, a duty, a moral duty to help each other to regain full human status on the planet. And that doesn't mean I dislike white folk, because, you know, their only problem is that they believe they're white. You know, they really believe, you know, that classification scheme says something significant about them. You know, you hear them talk about it all the time. I'm a white person, and, you know, they've internalized it. Right. But we have too. And, you know, when you internalize an artificial designation like race, then it twists your thinking. In their case, it makes them think...
That's completely off topic from today's race, but my mother's a big genealogy nut.
It's not off topic, by the way.
When I learned that I was Irish, and that, because not saying that I dislike white people, because we all know that I worked for a fabulous white guy, but it was shocking to me. It did set me off balance a little bit.
Why, because you couldn't hate them anymore, huh?
Yeah. A little bit of watching Gone with the Wind.
Yeah, but doesn't that show you how stupid it is? Now, look, we did not invent race classification. We did not invent it. We are not the ones who have supported it to the detriment of people classified as black for the last 250 years. We're the ones who are trying to get rid of the stigma attached to race classification. But we're also the ones who are confused about it, because although we wanted it to continue so that we could measure progress, because we had to have a statistical basis to determine, you know, was this so-called white man serious about, you know, making things better for us? Right. So we had to be able to measure that. But beyond that, you know, we ought to eliminate it. And one day I hope to see the classification obliterated.
Do you think that us voting for some black candidates because we believe they can translate for us has handicapped us or set us back in some ways because all did not live up to our expectations?
Well, there are no human beings, if you look at political leaders collectively, who have lived up to their expectations as a whole. I mean, a whole lot of presidents who are white.
But it doesn't seem to hurt the white people as much as it hurts us.
Oh, it's killing the white folks. Are you kidding?
They still get to be white when they wake up.
Wait. That's not going to change because of who they elect as president. But look at George Bush, killing white America. And white America, and killing black America, as a matter of fact, killing Europe, and, you know, killing our reputation in every segment of the globe. And setting the economy back tremendously. He's hurting working families. But some white men are so attached to this man emotionally. They don't care that he's dumb. They don't care that he's failed at everything he tried before he became president. Even as governor of Texas, they don't care that he really doesn't identify with oppressed people who can't make it without some kind of social support. They don't care that he's hostile to black people. He doesn't reach out to us and say, hey, what can I do to bring you into the world of full productivity? He doesn't do any of these things. They don't care that he didn't know how to run a baseball team, didn't know how to run a bank, didn't know how to run an oil company, was a cocaine addict for most of his adult life, and a recovering alcoholic. And they don't care that he's bringing his religion into the political realm at the expense of people all over the world with different points of view about God.
Not even just all over the world. Here in the United States of America, we have people of different religions.
And they don't care that he's a big liar. So, I mean, he's lying to them. He's getting over on them. The rich get richer, the poor
But
get
didn't
poorer.
he get the ignorant vote in that, and having Condoleezza and Colin Powell? They believed, well, he has a black person standing next to him, so he must not really hate them as much as they say he does.
Now, in the first election, he didn't have Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice because he didn't appoint them until after he became president. That's the critical election, and he stole that election. The Supreme Court elected him president of the United States,
That's a
and
hot
we've
topic.
forgotten about it.
That's a hot topic,
No,
stolen elections, here on the day of the primary, September 12th at Edenland. We're going to take a break.
Okay.
We're going to come back because we're going to keep going with this. We'll be right back with you, BMORENEWS.com. We're back, and this is Politics 06. I'm Catalina Byrd, and we are joined by Billy Murphy.
How are you?
I'm wonderful. We were just getting into the heated debate when we had to take a break momentarily for our sponsors. But we were talking about stolen elections, so let's go to Ohio, 2004.
Well,
Stolen
Robert
again?
Kennedy Jr. Has written an extraordinarily well-documented piece about how the Republican Party systematically stole the election, the presidential election of 2004. And he
What about
focused
2000?
a lot of attention on Ohio. Well, in 2000, Florida was the problem, and we know that they systematically undercounted the Democratic vote in Florida, and discouraged black people with all kinds of foul techniques from voting, and that they resisted a recount, in a society where recounts should be routinely granted, just so everybody feels comfortable that we got the correct result. And we know that since the election of 2000, there's been this movement to adopt these electronic voting machines manufactured primarily by a company called Diebold.
And we have those now in Maryland here.
Yeah, and Diebold designed the machines defectively, and some people would say deliberately so that you could go into the mechanism, it's simply a computer, and change the totals without having any audit trail. Now, whoever approved having a voting machine with no audit trail means that you approve stealing an election without being able to tell that it was stolen. So that's the background. So we've got a lot of opportunities for voter fraud, voter theft, wherever these Diebold machines are used, and unfortunately we've adopted them statewide in Maryland. However, we did insist that there be an audit trail. But these machines are not yet state-of-the-art, they're not yet time-tested, they have defects. We found out last year that this particular voting machine that we purchased, and that many others in the country purchased, was capable of being hacked, capable of being altered in terms of the results, and whatnot. And this is a very disquieting thing for those of us that want a real democracy that can't be bought or corrupted. Now let's go to Ohio. Bush spent a lot of money in Ohio. There was a black man who was the head of elections in Ohio who acted so corruptly and so partisanly, if there's such a word, in such a partisan fashion, I guess I should say, that he completely skewed the results of the election. To make matters worse, Bush corrupted some of the black preachers in Ohio and gave them a lot of money and converted them to the Republican Party. And they went out and proselytized among the black community with a tremendous impact and convinced black people that somehow George Bush was the guy that they should vote for. Now, you know that's about as stupid as it gets for us, and it's a diabolical approach to political life because they corrupted black folk with money.
Politicians have been using the church to get to us in our vote, though, for years, long before George Bush.
But
fortunately,
with rare exception, black preachers have been incorruptible. They've been rocks for us. I mean, they were the backbone of the civil rights movement. and they were the backbone of political development in Baltimore, for example, and many other major cities. Not a hint of any corruption on a widespread level until that election in Ohio in 2004. Very disappointing for all of us to see it. But if you read Robert Kennedy's article, which was published in Rolling Stone, you'll see all of the ways that the Republican Party has deliberately tried to dishonestly steal the elections across the country. And I anticipate there'll be some shenanigans in various places outside of Maryland. Now, that being said, there were lots of problems today.
There were.
You had, appallingly incompetent administration of an election.
We had a number of judges that didn't arrive.
Who I support, I hope that the governor will say that he is as appalled as the rest of us are.
Well, he has. He has today. We were together in Dundalk this afternoon. I'm visiting some polling places. Both he and Chris Cox are disturbed at how there was not enough information and training given to the people that were working at the polls. They don't seem to have a full understanding of how the machines work themselves. So when someone needs assistance, they can't really give it beyond just telling you to go in the booth. They don't really know what else to do. We had a number of election judges to not show up. We've had problems all around the state today.
Yeah, voting machines that arrive without the keys to unlock them.
But see, in that we are happy that we had our smaller victory earlier this summer in the stopping the early voting. Because imagine if that had been the case and we had days of voting. These are the problems we had just today. What would the problems have been had there been 11 days or 14 days?
Well, but a lot of this, I have mixed feelings about early voting. I understood the governor's point, but I also understood the point of the Democratic Party.
Well, please explain it to me.
The Democratic Party wanted to make voting easier.
I didn't realize it was hard.
Well, it's easier if you give people more opportunities to do it. I didn't say make it easy. I said make it easier. And they wanted to see the turnout increase. Now, naturally, in a state where Republicans are a minority, Republicans don't think that's a good idea, that anything that can be developed will increase the Democratic turnout. And I say this as an early supporter. I mean, I'm not stupid, so I'm not going to go along with the okie doke if I think, something's wrong. And so there was a lot of that feeling. But then the Democrats took it a step too far, and they did something that Democrats in other parts of the country refused to do, and they endorsed these electronic voting machines as part of the package without insisting that there be adequate audit trails and this, that, and the other. And then the governor put his foot down and said, hell no, we're not doing that.
Well, is it easier to allow a person to vote outside of their district, or is that just more room for you to steal back what you feel was already stolen from you? Because to some extent, the governor that we're talking about that we support gets a lot of negative energy just for being Republican and being associated with George Bush when he is far from him.
Well, no, I mean, if you're going to be associated with George Bush, you deserve some negative energy for that. I mean, let's face it. I was offered the opportunity to meet George Bush, and I turned it down. I said, hell no, I don't want to meet him. I don't want to be associated with this man. I don't like anything he stands for. Anything. And so I, as a matter of principle, I didn't go in there and buck and wing and shake the president's hand. Man, hell with that.
Right.
I got more self-respect than that.
But you don't think that they saw that as an opportunity to steal back what was already taken from them?
That was all about money. And who stole what from who?
Who votes outside of their district? What's good about that? How does that make it easier?
You said take back what was stolen.
Well, we were talking about the 2004 election. It was stolen. To which some extent, it's like yesterday for some people. It's
but
still
it wasn't stolen in Maryland.
Bad taste.
No, it wasn't stolen in Maryland.
Some people, those ignorant vote that you spoke of, they don't care. They don't have to be anywhere near Ohio. They still feel as though they, too, were personally robbed. As we were as a nation.
Well, yeah, we were. But, I mean, we weren't robbed in Maryland.
Right.
Because Maryland has always had equality.
Well, what do you say to those people that can't make the distinction between George W. Bush and Robert L. Early?
I tell them that I feel sorry for them. That's what I tell them. If you don't know the difference between Bob Ehrlich and George Bush, you haven't been paying attention.
It makes my job harder. I combat the ignorance far more than I get to educate.
We gotta look. We gotta look beyond the ordinary rhetoric. And my point of view is that, although I'm a Democrat, I reserve the right to reject what the Democratic Party does when it takes me as a black person and takes our group as black people for granted. And that's what they've been doing time after time after time. It's not going to stop me from voting for Kwesi Mfume in the general election.
Right.
And it's not going to stop me from voting for Stu Sims in the general election or Doug Gansler if he wins, because I don't trust the Republican Party. I just happen to think that Bob Ehrlich is an exceptional guy character-wise, and that he was superior to Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, and that he is superior to Martin O'Malley, both in terms of being a human being with the kinds of qualities that I want, speaking his mind, not being, under the table, just what you see is what you get, and the programs that he's advanced in Maryland. And I think Martin did a terrible job for the city. I mean, look, education. He comes in and he says, well, black people are drowning in 10 feet of water. So I'm just going to reduce the water to 9 3/4 feet. Well, I'm sorry. That's not the radical approach you need when you're dealing with a drowning person. You need to get them out the water.
Of course.
You know what I mean? So
you brought up one of my favorite subjects.
He says, I lowered the water level. But you didn't reach in the water and get those drowning kids.
Right.
You didn't come up with that radical solution to drowning. You can't say, oh, well, we're going to adjust the water a little bit. No, come on. And now crime. Let's look at crime. I never thought in my lifetime I would see a white man in Maryland get away with locking up thousands of black people for nothing for every year of his administration. And we sit by and do absolutely nothing in response to it.
That's right.
It's outrageous.
It is.
And my last conversation with Martin was about that. I said, Martin, how do you expect me to be able to support anybody, put you aside, who for political gain locks up 20 to 30,000 black people a year and doesn't even charge them with a crime? And it's his police department. The commissioner does what he tells him, and it's his state police commissioner. How competent is that?
Right.
And so I want this man to do the same thing to me statewide that he's been doing to me in Baltimore City. Oh, yeah. He can really solve our education problem. He's demonstrated that, hasn't he, folks? Wrong.
Well, there's people, in fact, I was just having a very heated debate at the bar before you arrived with some people that believe that the reason that the Baltimore City school system is in the trouble that it's in is because we did not force our help down their throat. When I say we, I speak of Bob Ehrlich and the state, that they gave him that money, and they didn't really give it to him. They didn't really lose $60 million. They never really had it to begin with.
Who's they?
The government, the state. Bob Ehrlich never really gave Baltimore City a budget to work with, so they didn't really lose it.
That's preposterous.
These are the things that we deal with in the trenches on a day-to-day basis.
That's preposterous. And, we couldn't even, under Democrats, either Schaefer, Schmoke, or people that came before them, we could not get black history taught in the state of Maryland. It was Nancy Grasnick who came up with that concept, not Schmoke, not...
and just for people who don't know, Nancy is white.
Yeah, Nancy Grasnick is the Secretary of Education for Bob Ehrlich in his administration, but she served under a Democrat before that. And she's disgusted with what's going on in Baltimore City schools. And
I think everyone is.
And she wants a radical solution. But, we get one incremental approach after another incremental approach. And again, when you drown, and don't bring me a small reduction in the water level. Get me out of the water. Stop me from drowning. Anything less than that's bullshit.
I guess it goes without saying that you were for the state taking over those 11 schools.
Oh, absolutely I was for it. I mean, it's better than what we're doing in Baltimore. We got drowning kids and no solution in sight. And we talk about test scores. Give me a break.
Test scores are drastically
Now, I'll tell you what we need. Instead of being critic, I'm going to propose a solution. We've got to bite the bullet and recognize that the inner city environments that our kids are being raised in are so toxic to them that the little bit we give them during the day gets wiped out when they're on their way to school and after they come home. The environment in which they live is killing them. Right. And so now we've got to remove them from that environment. Now, if a white man suggested that, we say, oh, concentration camps. No, this is a black man suggesting that we got to take kids out of this environment and put them in a boarding school type environment where 24/7 we control their environment to make it completely positive, fun, conducive to education, nonviolent, and resourceful. Now, what's wrong with that? We're paying $50,000 per Negro on the back end by, we call it prison.
Right.
And white folks, you know, at least a lot of white folks and some black folks, they get emotionally involved. Oh, we got to get these criminals, we got to put them in jail. But where's the same emotion to keep them from being criminals?
Right.
Where's that front-end emotion, which has foresight, wisdom, planning, control? And that's what black kids need. We're not giving it to them. The mayor's not even talking about giving it to them.
No, because he'd rather lock them up.
Sad. Well,
it's sad.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
I agree. Now, when you mention crime, let's take another part of what makes a lot of the crime, which is the war on drugs, or that's what it's been coined as.
Well, the war on drugs is really a war on black people and Mexicans, because we are the only people going to jail as a result of drug using and drug distribution. Now, there's some white folks going to jail, but let me give you an idea of what I'm talking about. 1996, let's just pick that because we got good numbers for that year. There were 1,546 people prosecuted by state's attorney that year for drug dealing. Not possession, we're not counting that. Of that 1,546 in the city, 45% white, less than 1%, 14 were white. Well, if you're not prosecuting people for dealing drugs to white folks, drugs are legal in the white community. What am I missing? The definition of illegal is that when you violate the law, you get brought to justice.
Regardless of race, creed, or color.
Regardless of race, creed, or color. But that's not happening anywhere in the country. And this picture that I just painted in Baltimore is true this year. Same percentages. True last year. And we got a black state's attorney. She doesn't say anything about it. It's okay with her that we're not prosecuting white drug dealers and white drug users.
Right.
It's okay with her that she just takes whatever the police serve up, and that's what we eat. Now, let me tell you why the police only serve up black people. See, we got a we don't pay attention to history. In 1968, Richard Nixon was running to be the first Republican president since Dwight Eisenhower. He wanted to undo all this liberal stuff that Lyndon Johnson and Kennedy had done. And most of all, he wanted to convert all of these southern races and Midwestern races, the red state people.
Right.
He wanted to convert them to the Republican Party. Their primary beef was us. They hated the Civil Rights Act of '64. They hated the Voting Rights Act of '68. They hated the anti-war movement, and they hated the movement for women to become first-class, full-fledged citizens.
That's
okay,
right.
They hated the women's movement. And so these were some pissed-off crackers. And so Nixon understood that a smart strategy for election would be to go get them emotionally. Let them know, we on your side.
Right.
Now, what's that mean? He means, we'll solve your nigger problem for you. We'll solve the problem that you have with women. And we'll solve all these other anti-war kooks, as he called them. You know, we're going to take care of all of that. So they flipped over to the Republican Party at the speed of light. And we forget that's when the South became Republican. Now, one of the tools that he used to do this was he said about us, crime in the street. Well, he wasn't talking about crime in executive suite. We know that was always more massive than our little penny-ante crimes, and and mostly in the black community. We weren't robbing on a national scale like they've been doing for years.
Right.
And he said, crime in the street, we're going to stop it, and then I'm going to declare a war on drugs. And here's what happened next. That got a lot of traction. The letters that he sent out during that time, the Nixon archives are full of how that tactic worked to galvanize the South to become Republican. But the next thing is what killed us. In 1969, Democrats and Republicans, in the wake of the riots of '68, because that really set white folks on fire more than anything. Okay, so in the wake of the riots, they passed this new legislation to create hundreds more police in black neighborhoods. It was called the Safe Streets Act. And so all of a sudden you had these extra police in every place there were black folks. You had extra weapons. You had assault weapons. You had what do they call it when they bring these tank-like things in and bust your house down, and all that stuff came in vogue. And so that began the over-policing of the black community, and it had a political agenda attached to it. Break down this civil rights movement. That was agenda number one. Break down the political development in the black community that Nixon viewed as dangerous. Break down the anti-war movement and the left-wing movement that was going on in the black community. And put those Negroes in jail. And so that's when we got preventive detention. We got that in 1970. First in D.C., then nationwide. Preventive detention meant that in federal court, you could lock up somebody presumptively innocent. They had to prove they were innocent in order to get out on bail.
Right.
All right, ridiculous. Anti-American in the extreme. But we stood by and we watched, we protested. But the Democrats in increasing numbers are going along with this because their white constituents are saying, well, we've got to stop crime. We've got to stop what these Negroes are doing in the streets of America. And so now that's the war on drugs. We're over-policed. We're over-arrested. The statistics are just breathtaking. I mean, look, 75% of all the drugs in America are used by white folks. They got 75% of the drug dealers. But even though we got 12, 13% of the drug dealers and drug users, we 75% of the prison system. Right. We're 75% of the arrests in Baltimore City at any given time this year. 75% of all black men are either in jail or under some kind of court or parole supervision. It's ridiculous.
Do you think that we solved the drug problem by
legalizing? Yes.
I was going to say by treating the addict, but that's another discussion for another day.
The only way we deal with this is we legalize. Now, that may seem radical, but that's what we did to solve the murder problem created by the prohibition of alcohol. We have the same murder rate during the prohibition of alcohol that we now have during the prohibition of drugs. Now, I'm interested in stopping the violence. As long as drugs are illegal, you're going to have violence because that's how they police themselves, with guns. Now, number two, I want the neighborhoods back. Well, as long as you have drug dealers controlling the corners, you're not going to get the neighborhoods back. You're going to have rhetoric. Rhetoric doesn't get the neighborhoods back. Changing our approach will. Number three, they control what gets sold. They control the drug of the moment. They control the fads. They control the price. They control the mode of distribution. All of that's got to change too. And with the money we'll save in over-policing the black community and over-incarcerating the black community, we'll be able to educate people. That's the only way you stop people from using drugs in the first place. We all know anybody in his bright mind in America wants drugs can get drugs. Right. Can't stop. Especially white folks. They prove that day after day. White folks in the white community using their cocaine right now as we speak. They're using their marijuana right now as we speak. They're using their LSD. Some even using heroin without any fear that there will be meaningful police surveillance or arrests or anything of that nature. White folks know what I'm talking about because they live in it. All right? Black folks in constant fear that we can't even smoke a joint because that's the gateway to getting our stuff.
Right.
You know, and there are more arrests for marijuana than there are for any other drug, right. Which is ridiculous.
And I would ask another question, but we have to wrap up here this evening. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. It was nice to meet you for the first time. I know that we'll do this again. Maybe not with the camera running, but just
well, you know what I like? I like to see a gorgeous, dark-skinned black woman who is so well educated. I understand you have your degree in philosophy, or you're working on your degree in philosophy. What a tremendous degree, because you get a chance to really think outside the box.
I pride myself on it.
Don't give that up and get back inside the box now.
Okay.
Stay outside the box.
As long as you'll be meeting me there when I get there.
Well, God willing.
All right.
And thank you so much.
Thank you. This is Politics 06. I'm Catalina Byrd with Simone Real Estate. We thank you for joining us this evening.